Amateur Traveler is in its 20th year now, but can you imagine if I had people on the show who had never been to the destination but had just read about it or seen a movie about it? That wouldn't make any sense at all, and you wouldn't listen. We all know how important it is to receive advice from people who know a destination to get the most authentic local experience. And a great option for experiencing this is Explore Worldwide and their authentic small group adventures, led by local tour leaders, perfect for solo travelers who want to meet like minded people with a desire for adventure. I'm often an independent traveler, but two of my last three trips were with small group tours because they organize everything and it's a lot easier. If you want to recreate the tour I did to Malta, they have a Malta and Gozo Discovery Tour. I'm intrigued by one of their tours called A Taste of Sicily. The company again is Explore Worldwide, and visit exploreworldwide.com to learn more. And thanks to Explore Worldwide for sponsoring this episode of Amateur Traveler. The nights are long, the days are short, and the weather is chilly to downright cold, depending on where you are. It's a good time to slip into a Quince iconic Mongolian cashmere sweaters, which start at only $50. You can treat yourself to everyday luxury at an affordable price with Quince. If you really want to dive into luxury, you can check out their leather handbags, washable silk shirts, and European linen sheet sets. Whatever you're looking for at Quince, all the prices are 50 to 80% less than similar brands, and they do that by partnering directly with top factories and cutting out the middleman. They only work with factories that use safe, ethical, and responsible manufacturing processes. And of course, they use premium fabrics and finishes for that luxury feel in every piece. But you've already heard me rave about my Quince travel pants. Treat yourself this winter without the luxury price tag. Go to quince.com/traveler for 365-day returns plus free shipping on your order. That's QUINCE.com/traveler to get free shipping and 365-day returns. Quince.com/traveler. And thanks to Quince for sponsoring this episode of Amateur Traveler.
Got my bags packed, I'm on a roll. I'm heading out there and I'm ready to go. I'm looking real good in my passport photo. Oh, no.
Amateur Traveler, episode 277. Three presidents called it home, and one built something there he was more proud of than being president. Today, the Amateur Traveler goes to Charlottesville, Virginia.
Cafe. I know that I should be heading home, but maybe not today.
Welcome to the Amateur Traveler. I'm your host, Chris Christensen. Before we get into today's interview, I do have three news stories for you. The first one, there are new rules for those who are flying in the United States coming from the Department of Transportation. The first one is the rules about leaving planes on tarmacs now also apply to foreign carriers. And the second one, if you pay a baggage fee and they lose your baggage or it doesn't show up in a timely fashion, you now get that fee back. And if that makes you more interested in flying, you should know that there might be more places to go to. A new survey has discovered 657 new islands around the globe. These are mostly boundary islands just off the coasts of major land masses, and most in North America. And then to help you enjoy the experience of flying there, American Airlines is now going to offer happy hour drink prices. Some people think of flight attendants as cocktail waitresses in the sky. This will not help. For links to all three of those stories, check out the show notes at amateurtraveler.com. I'd like to welcome back to the show Jason and Janie, who come to talk to us about Charlottesville, Virginia. Welcome back to the show.
Thanks for having us, Chris.
And I say welcome back. This is your fourth time being on the Amateur Traveler. They were in order Barbados, and then Bavaria, which has actually been a very popular episode, and then Namibia just last summer. But this time we're talking about a domestic destination in your hometown.
Yes, Charlottesville, Virginia.
But not where you're originally from.
No, I'm originally from outside of Atlanta, and Janie is originally from right outside of Fort Worth, Texas.
And what led you to Charlottesville, Virginia?
I came to Charlottesville to go to grad school at the University of Virginia, and I dragged Janie with me, and we just never left afterwards.
Cool, and I'm not sure that everybody has heard of the university there, but I suspect a few people have heard about its founder.
Yes, Thomas Jefferson.
And my understanding is that the four things he wanted to be known for include founding the University of Virginia, but did not include being president of the United States.
That's right. If you go to Monticello, Jefferson's home, which is right here in Charlottesville, his burial site is in the backyard, effectively, and on his tombstone, the epitaph lists those four items, and I'm blanking on what they are, but President of the United States is definitely not one of them.
Writing the Declaration of Independence, writing the Virginia Constitution, founding the university, and I'm blanking on the fourth.
I think it had something to do with a rights declaration, but not 100% sure. It just means you'll have to go to Monticello and find out for yourself.
And speaking of Monticello, we are talking about an area that is fairly rich in history. So what would you recommend we see? Why should someone follow you to Charlottesville, Virginia?
Well, if you are coming because you're interested in history, you cannot miss Monticello. The house is a museum dedicated to Jefferson's love of innovation and being the founder of a bunch of different inventions. Being an inventor himself, it's a feast for the eyes to see this house and all of the innovations that he put into it, from automatic doors, dumbwaiters in the kitchen area.
He also created a duplicator, so when he would write his notes, he had something that would automatically make copies for him.
And as I recall, when we say a duplicator, it was a mechanical device that would move a different pen.
Correct.
This is before we have carbon paper and...
Yes, exactly. He also had installed a clock, which was a rarity back then, but he miscalculated for the weights on the clock, and so they actually had to cut a hole in the floor and go into the basement so that the weights wouldn't pile up on the floor. He's very much probably one of the last true Renaissance men of the time. So was very interested in science and in philosophy, and tried his hand at a lot of things, farming, even wines. He tried to start the practice of wines, and there is a theory that Jefferson was the one who actually saved French wines because it was his cuttings that were used in French wines after they got wiped out in the early 1800s.
Now, in California, they tell that story differently, but...
There's no location bias here at all. So Jefferson's home is one place. So Virginia is known as the state of the presidents. I believe that there are 7 presidents that came from Virginia, and 3 of them come from Charlottesville or the Charlottesville area. The next one is Montpelier, which is about 30 miles north of Charlottesville, and it's where James Madison lived. And then in between was the 3rd president of the area, James Monroe. So he's got Ashlawn Highlands. So if you want to do the history tour, definitely Monticello is probably the most in-depth, followed by Montpelier and then Ashlawn. But if you want to do a circle, you can start at Monticello, go to Montpelier, come back to Ashlawn, and then have lunch where the 3 of them would meet at a tavern called Mickey Tavern. And so it is a replication. They actually moved it stone by stone, brick by brick, to its current location, which is right next to Monticello. And make sure that you come hungry because they have an all-you-can-eat buffet of contemporary fare from the early 1800s.
And it is quite delicious.
And we say when they would meet for lunch, that's while they were still speaking to each other before they ended up in separate parties in the political system.
Correct.
Jefferson being a Democrat and Madison being a Federalist.
Yes. So this was right during the time when they were discussing independence and then when they were talking about what they needed to put into the Constitution. Because, as you know, Jefferson was the one who actually wrote the Declaration of Independence.
And by the way, I did look it up, and the reason we couldn't remember the 4th thing on his tombstone is there are only 3 things on his tombstone. So,
3, 4.
And what else should we see while we're in the Charlottesville area?
The next category of activities involve eating and drinking. So
some of my favorite activities.
Yes. Virginia is the 5th largest wine producing state in the United States. So they have a lot of wineries in the area. Some of our favorites And I think part of the reason that there are favorites is not only the quality of the wine, but also the views. So we are right near the Appalachian Trail and the Appalachian Mountains, so you get some great views. So some of the ones that we like are Veritas Winery, King Family Vineyards, Stone Mountain Winery, and Pollock, Pollack, not like Jackson Pollock, but Pollack. Most of them are known for their reds. There are a few really good whites like Viogniers, but they're great places to go, do tastings, and then just sit out, have a glass of wine, and enjoy the views.
And I'm continuously surprised how many states that when we talk about them, people talk about the wineries when I don't think of them as being wine-producing states. So I was even more surprised when you were telling me that it was the fourth ranked, and I think that you've got a new wine owner, a new vineyard owner in the area?
Indeed we do. There's some gentleman named Mr. Donald Trump who will probably be hiring some apprentices for the winery that he bought last week. The next category is breweries. There are quite a few local breweries. I think the number is up to 6 now. A couple of our favorites are the Blue Mountain Brewery, which is right near Veritas. It overlooks gorgeous, gorgeous views of the mountains that are out there. They tend to do low IBU beers. Another one that we like is Star Hill, Starr Hill, and they also distribute locally, so pretty much any restaurant you go to, you can get Star Hill. And then South Street in downtown Charlottesville has really good beers and a really nice place to go grab a meal, which leads into our third category, which is restaurants. So I heard, and you and I were discussing this before we started taping, that Charlottesville has the highest number of restaurant seats per capita of any city in the United States. Whether or not that's true is debatable, but they do have an awful lot. Peter Chang just recently opened up a restaurant here, and they tend to be locally owned and not your typical chains. So we definitely have the chains, but if you want to step out of the chains, then Charlottesville has a wide variety of cuisines and tastes for just about any taste bud palate that you might want to go after. And it goes from high end to the cheap places that the students like to eat. So you can have a really nice 5-course meal in a really nice resort setting at a place like the Clifton Inn or the Boar's Head or Keswick, all the way to eating a Gus Burger at the corner right across from the University of Virginia, and that's where all the students come at 2 in the morning when they have the munchies.
Excellent. Actually, you mentioned per capita. What is the sort of the summer versus winter population of Charlottesville? You are a college town, so...
Charlottesville itself, the city, has just a little under 50,000 people. If you count the surrounding county area, it's a little under 100,000, and I think the university has around 25,000 people. So if you're going to the corner area or to the university grounds during school, you notice, and then in the summer, it's a ghost town. So there is a definite difference in the population. I'm sure it's that way with any college town as well. But we have some permanent residents such as Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson, Mr. Trump and his winery, John Grisham, and Dave Matthews, the Dave Matthews Band.
But I would argue outside of the core concentration of the UVA grounds, which is what they call the campus, you really don't notice a whole lot when the students are or are not in school. Definitely more crowded around the university, but outside of that, you really don't notice a whole lot of difference.
And in your opinion, when is the best time to come to Charlottesville? Or even better yet, what's the best day of the year to come to Charlottesville?
Without a doubt, if you can get here in the fall when the leaves are turning, it will take your breath away. The fall colors here are magnificent.
And you'd have a late fall, so we'd be talking more like...
Very late October, early November time frame. Temperatures are going to be warm enough for you to still be outside, more than likely, in just mountains of color.
And then in terms of special days, is there any 1 or 2 days in Charlottesville that are particularly celebrated or particularly special?
I think that there are a couple of activities. So there isn't like a Charlottesville Day, but the Virginia Film Festival is really good. It features a lot of short clips. We enjoy going and watching kind of the finalists for the shorts and the documentaries. There's also the Virginia Festival of the Book, and that tends to get a lot of authors who come in and talk about their books. And then there are a lot of wine festivals that happen kind of throughout the spring and the summer. But I think if I was going to pick a time, I would pick either the Virginia Film Festival or the Virginia Festival of the Book.
And the film festival is typically in the early fall, around September, I want to say. And the Charlottesville Festival of the Book just happened. So maybe early March, somewhere around there.
Okay.
And some other activities, I know Jay mentioned the fall is a good time to come, and I wholeheartedly agree. There are a lot of hiking trails around here. It's more of a green city than I think most cities tend to be. There are even trails within the city limits. There's a river that runs through here, and there's a very, very well-kept trail system that mimics the route of the river. And then not that far from here, a 45-minute drive, you can be on the Appalachian Trail. And so you can go up and down it. There are also lots of parks and waterfalls. If you like climbing mountains, there's rock climbing. There are actually 2 ski resorts within an hour. The closer one is Wintergreen, and the one that's a little further away in Harrisonburg is Massanutten. And then there's also another reason that the fall is a good time to come is that's when the apples ripen. And one of our favorite places to go is Carter's Mountain Orchard. It's a mountain. It's on the same road that Monticello is on. And they have enormous, enormous fields of apple trees. And so you just get a bag or a basket, and you go walking through, and you pick apples, and they have great apple cakes and apple cider. And you sort of have the Forrest Gump moment about shrimp by the time you're done, because everything is apples.
And you were talking about hiking and the Appalachian Trail near there. Obviously, you don't have to through hike. You can sectional hike in this area. That is between you and the Shenandoah Valley to your northwest?
Right. You would actually travel a little southwest.
Okay.
You can get to the Shenandoah Valley fairly easily by car. It's probably an hour to an hour and a half away. It depends on which way you go. And then if you go up in there, then there are all sorts of little towns in there. There are some Mennonite areas that are interesting to go to and see their crafts. But it's kind of one of those, there's a view around every corner. But I would definitely, if you're coming here, I would advise that you rent a car. You can come down by Amtrak. The airport is great. Goat Show is wonderful.
Well, it's a major hub for U.S. Airways, for one thing.
Well, I wouldn't call it a major hub.
It's a hub.
Yeah, it does come in. American comes in, U.S. Air, United, Delta. But the public transport itself within Charlottesville, and especially if you want to get outside of Charlottesville, is a little lacking. So you probably will need a car.
Okay.
And just really quickly to jump back to that sectional hiking, one thing that we haven't exactly touched on is the Shenandoah National Park, which is about 30 minutes away from us. And there are lots and lots of hikes up through there, long, short, and everything in between. Some to waterfalls and some just with spectacular overlooks.
And then another one that you can either drive or drive to and then do hikes is Skyline Drive, which runs kind of, again, along the line of the Shenandoah Valley. There are camping areas, but it's just great for nature watchers and nature lovers. It's one of those places where you can see deer up close, you can watch animals, but you're not going to see a lot of bears or anything like that. So it's also very safe to go hiking and camping in.
Okay. Yeah, I was just trying to remember how close that came to where you were.
It's close enough that if you want to go do a trip. So, for example, if you're a Civil War buff and you wanted to find out about where Stonewall Jackson was marching up and down through the Shenandoah Valley, it's definitely within day trip distance.
Okay.
Yeah, no more than 2 hours. I think everything that we're sort of highlighting is no more than 2 hours, probably.
Yeah. Except for if you wanted to do some of the battlefield stuff, like the wilderness, you're probably talking about an hour and 15-minute drive.
Well, and we do happen to be recording this on the anniversary of the start of the Civil War.
Correct. It's the
150th anniversary of the start of the Civil War, yeah.
Yep.
Interesting. Anything else that we should consider doing while we're in Charlottesville?
Well, one thing we haven't talked about is the arts. Charlottesville has a very vibrant arts culture. There is a local theater group called Live Arts who put on productions year-round, and they're really high quality, and all local actors, directors, writers, and crew members. And they've done Sweeney Todd last year. That's probably one of the more notable performances. They kind of try to do shows that are just on the verge of popularity to get some exposure. That is definitely worth taking in. It's, a little night of theater. There is a fabulously recently renovated Paramount Theater that is more of it almost looks like an opera house. Mm-hmm. That's kind of the best way I can describe it. And then we have the John Paul Jones Arena, which is where the UVA men's and women's basketball players play. But in addition to that, there are a lot of concerts and shows. They just recently did a Cirque du Soleil performance. They have the monster truck shows come through there. So, there's just a huge variety.
You can buy the whole seat, but you'll only need the edge.
And we get some really big name acts coming through here for being such a small city. We've had Dave Matthews repeatedly, of course, because he lives here, but we've had Billy Joel, U2, we've had the Rolling Stones, and all kinds of big shows. We also have something that's a lot of fun to do in the summer, particularly, is called Fridays After 5, and it's on the downtown mall, which is a gorgeous pedestrian mall that's where we were talking about with the boutique shopping mm-hmm. and some of the kind of swankier restaurants and after-hours places. At the end of the downtown mall is the Charlottesville Pavilion, and they do a Fridays After 5 there where they have just a local live band, and people come out, and you can just hang out outside, have a beer or a glass of wine or something, and just chit-chat and sit on the lawn, and it draws a lot of people and is a lot of fun. It's a great way to meet people in Charlottesville.
And one thing I'm curious about, and you may not be able to answer this for me, you're a landlocked city, but your arena is named after the first captain in the American Navy, John Paul Jones. The connection being?
None. Actually, the John Paul Jones for whom the arena is named after was a very big contributor to UVA.
Ah, okay. Not the same John Paul Jones.
No relation at all except for the name.
Okay.
So I wanted to follow up on Janie's discussion about music. One of the larger music management companies is in Charlottesville. It's called Red Light Management. So what will happen is a lot of bands come in and they'll do recording here in Charlottesville, and so they play a concert while they're here. So that's why we got a lot of these. So Dave Matthews, obviously, third day comes and does their recording sessions. They have a lot of bands under their management that they do recording, as well as Charlottesville has spawned a couple of really well-known bands. So Dave Matthews being the most obvious, as well as Parachute. They're a relatively recently newly popular band. So if you want to go catch the next rising star, probably the place to go is Miller's on the downtown mall. They do live bands, and that's where kind of the next up-and-coming, if you want to catch a local band that might be an up-and-coming one, you could check out the fabulous String Dusters, or you could check out the Hackensaw Boys.
What's going to surprise me when I come to Charlottesville?
I think the diversity is such a melting pot here, and you hear that about a lot of big cities, but not so much the smaller cities. Each neighborhood has its own sort of flavor, if you will.
Okay.
I think the other thing that surprises me is that for its size, how much art and culture is here.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, one other activity is, I know Jane mentioned the UVA men's and women's basketball team, but UVA has a very strong, and when I say UVA, that's University of Virginia, has a very strong sports tradition. Their soccer team is fantastic. Their lacrosse team is really good. So if you like to follow college sports, the baseball team is always nationally ranked. So if you like to follow college sports, but you don't want to do the football or the basketball, then it's always fun to go check out a UVA men's or women's soccer game too.
Okay. How did you know when you had really become real Charlottesville residents, when you weren't just there for school anymore?
I know what mine is. And this is, I think, this might also answer the you're in Charlottesville when.
Okay.
You no longer gawk at any of the celebrities who live here.
Okay.
I would say when you get used to your commute involving windy two-lane, two-way roads and lots of cows.
The best money-saving tip for visiting Charlottesville?
If you're going to eat out at lunch. Don't eat out at dinner.
Okay.
Just like if you're going to France, it's the same idea. The lunches are going to be cheaper. Lodging is not particularly inexpensive here. If you're so inclined, you might try a house swap. But there are a lot of free things to do in Charlottesville, too. So going and hiking on the trails, walking through the university grounds, walking on the downtown mall and just window shopping. There's a lot of stuff that you can do for free, too.
Yeah.
The funniest thing you've ever seen in Charlottesville?
The line outside the Lady Gaga concert.
As we go to wind this down, we already answered one of our last two questions, but anything else that people need to know before they go to Charlottesville?
Be prepared to be outdoors because that's the best place to be in Charlottesville.
Yeah.
Okay. Excellent. And then if you had to summarize Charlottesville in 3 words, what 3 words would you use?
Cultural, green, and diverse would be mine.
Janie, you get 3 different ones. What do you like?
3.
You don't have to agree with him, you know.
Let's go with warm.
Okay. In which sense or both senses?
Well, inviting, I think, the people.
Okay.
Yeah, I was going to, not green, but yeah, definitely outdoorsy. Just tons and tons of trees, beautiful trees. So I guess trees and just quaint.
Okay. Excellent. You know, I just realized one question I should ask in terms of what will surprise me. I should put some context on this. Unlike the two of you, I did not grow up in the South. Does that make the answer any different?
There's no sweet tea here.
Oh, okay.
It's hard to find sweet tea. No, actually, you know, you asked that, and I would actually say that we both grew up in the Deep South, and to me, Charlottesville is more like Maryland in terms of its culture and its people than what I would typically ascribe to the southeastern United States. It definitely has a different culture. It has a different orientation. And I think that's an artifact of being a town that, while once was not defined by it, has historically been defined by the university.
Right, sure.
I thought of one other word for Charlottesville that I think describes it pretty well, and that's natural.
Okay. Natural in the sense of being part of its surroundings?
Yes, and a lot of the architecture here is built fitting into the natural environment as opposed to completely clearing 100 acres just to put a small building up.
Okay.
Does that make sense? They really tried to keep the city beautiful.
Excellent. Well, thank you both so much for coming back on the show. I would not be surprised if you might be on again sometime in the future.
Thanks for having us. Yeah, we're going to have to look through the list and then spin the globe and pick a place that you haven't done so that we can do another show.
Thanks for coming.
All right. Thanks a lot, Chris.
In news of the community, I heard from Monroe, who commented on the episode about volunteer travel to West Africa. My son and I just listened to this latest podcast while painting a dorm room in Colombia. Volunteers. We were, however, waiting for more references about being surprised by topless women, but I guess that's only in Turkey. We loved hearing about the medical boat and the West Africa culture, and Chris Gelabro is always entertaining. Thanks for another great one. And I find in my travels you don't run into topless women nearly quite as much as you either feared or hoped for, depending on your point of view. And I also got an email from Sterling who said, I'm married with 4 young sons, and a couple of years ago we traveled to France, Austria, Poland, Slovakia, and Hungary. It was a unique trip for my wife and I, as we had a 1-year-old, 5-year-old, 7-year-old, and a 9-year-old. My wife and I had traveled before, but before we had had children. To add a little extra to the mix, we traveled with my in-laws. It was incredibly interesting to see how the different countries and cultures reacted to young children. I must admit that this was quite an eye-opener, as here in Australia, children are more than often treated as a burden while traveling instead of places making accommodations. This was not the fact in Europe, bar Hungary. The biggest surprise was France. The best example of their hospitality was at the airport, having customs officials offering to take down prams and carry things for us. This blew us away. Also, we have a son who is highly allergic to nuts, and almost everywhere, people looked after him so nicely that it made traveling a joy. Isn't it interesting to hear another perspective on the French, who have a reputation of being rude, but that is not Sterling's experience. With that, we're going to end this episode of The Amateur Traveler. If you have any questions, feel free to post them on this episode at amateurtraveler.com or drop me an email to host@amateurtraveler.com. You can also follow me on Twitter at Chris2X. And remember, I'm giving things away on the Facebook community, facebook.com/amateurtraveler. As always, thanks so much for listening.
I got to see one more cathedral. I got to sit in one more cafe.